Welcome to the Living Well Show, where we have holistic conversations that inspire healing, hope, and transformation with your hosts, Dr. Albert and Shanique Tompkins. Hi, I am Dr. Albert.
Good night, everyone. I am Shanique.
Thank you for joining us, and I hope you guys are doing well on this evening. We got a great show, and Shanique, why don't you get us started tonight?
Absolutely. Well, happy November, everyone. Today is November 1st, and we're entering what is known in most of the world as the holiday season. So we thought we'd kick off the season talking about a topic that most people don't focus on, but many people suffer from. We're going to talk about grief this week and how to survive the holidays. We've been in this pandemic for well over a year, and many persons have lost loved ones, whether it was due to the pandemic or just natural causes or other tragedies. And we're going to talk about what do you do when you come to the holiday season and you still have those emotions of grief when everyone wants to celebrate and be happy. So tonight we have with us Miss Nije Johnson, and we're going to talk about it being okay to be sad during this time and how to survive the holiday blues. So Ms. Nije holds a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and she is certified in many different specialties such as grief management and bereavement, as well as trauma. She is also a life coach certified in grief coaching and child-centered play therapy. Nije has a very soft spot in her heart when working with grief due to the fact that she lost both of her parents at the tender age of 7. So her determination to help others cope with grief is very strong and unmeasurable. And we look forward to talking to Naiji on tonight. Naiji, will you go ahead and greet the audience?
Hello, everybody.
All right. So Naiji, you mentioned, and it was one of the reasons why we reached out to you, that you lost both your parents by the age of 7. And I'm sure that that formulated your path in life and what you're doing now. So, will you go ahead and tell us a bit about your journey and how you discovered that grief management was something that you wanted to do to impact the world?
Yes, most definitely. I lost my dad when I was 2, and it was just me and my mom, and then she passed away when I was 7. And it was really tough, but I had a very great support system. My aunt raised me. My aunt has no kids to this day. She has 0 children. So she stopped her whole life for me and the support of our family. I never had to go into the system or anything. My aunt was really big with sending me to grief support specialists and things like that. So I was always involved and knew I wasn't alone. In high school, I did a lot of things pertaining to grief. I would have grief awareness days with the place that I actually went when I was a child. It's called the Caring Foundation here in Pittsburgh. And every year we would do a grief awareness day, which is actually in November, Children's Grief Awareness Day. So we would do something really big every year to kind of make the kids feel special and to honor their loved ones. So since then, I knew this was my thing. I knew that I wasn't put in this situation to lose both parents, but still have a great support system and to have a voice. I could be the voice for the people who don't have it. And so I decided to pursue my bachelor's in psychology and then go on to counseling and realize that there are so many people out here like me or losing parents even at an older age and don't know how to deal with it. So I'm the one who wants to talk about the hard stuff. Nobody wants to talk about grief, and I understand that. So I'm like, well, I'm the one who wants to, so I take all of it.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, as a counselor myself, that is one area that can be challenging to discuss with your clients, right? From your perspective, being in the field for so long, how are you defining grief? What does grief mean from your perspective?
Grief is so many different things, and that's one thing that I teach my clients. It's not about just death. I talk about how divorce or losing a close friend, maybe friendships break up or losing a house. I know during the pandemic, a lot of people struggle with keeping their lights on and things like that. So, grief is way more than just death. It's
Yeah,
the loss of something special. If you lose your grandma's favorite pair of earrings, that can be a grief, and that can
yeah,
hurt you in a way that you don't think that it affects you. So I teach people that grief is so broad. So don't think that when somebody is grieving that it's just death. It's so much more than death. And I try to
yeah.
get people to understand that as a whole, that Your way of thinking grief is different from somebody else's, but
Yeah,
grief is grief. So we don't
that's good.
minimize anybody's grief.
That's good. You're right, and I agree because it's such a broad perspective. Sometimes you have to let people know that they feel a certain way because it's grief. They might not even realize it, you know.
Right.
So thank you for sharing that with us and let you know your perspective on that.
Most definitely.
How might grief manifest throughout a person's life? I'm sure a child may not be able to have the vocabulary to express the way a teenager or a way adult would. So, how could we maybe notice that a person is in a stage of grief, especially a younger person, when they don't
Most
have that
definitely.
vocabulary?
Most definitely. So I teach the 5 stages of grief. So I go through sadness, anger, bargaining,
Mm.
acceptance, and
Yeah.
depression. They have them categorized. They always say this is the way they're supposed to be, but in a kid, you'll definitely see them different. You may see anger first in a kid, so it's very good to have those conversations with your kid. Just people classify kids are bad. Those are bad kids, but you don't really know what they're going through at home. So anger is really big that you'll see in a kid. I think as you get older, you're able to experience more of like the depression and things like that. But I think anger and sadness are the two emotions that we're kind of taught as a kid. Those are like the main two emotions you show. You're either happy or you're angry. Those are the two. So, um, with the 5 stages of grief, I do teach my kids and I give them examples of how you process the 5 stages. And even though acceptance is one, I don't want to say I don't think people should accept it. I also
Mhm.
think that it's a process to come to acceptance. Like I said, it's been 20 years since my mom has been gone, and sometimes I still haven't fully accepted it. There's just certain days that it just doesn't work. So acceptance is one that's like, I think it's okay. Acceptance is different when you talk about it. When you can talk about it freely, that's a form of acceptance. But not being like, okay, well, I'm okay and I'm never going to be sad again. That's most
Mhm.
people think what acceptance is.
Yeah.
So the 5 stages of grief is really how I teach people to identify it within kids and teenagers, even in adults, because sometimes we don't know how to express our sadness or our depression as well.
I agree. And, unfortunately, last year I suffered the loss of my mother. And so it took me about a year to quote unquote accept it.
Hmm.
And, it can be a very dark place for many persons. I wonder if you can speak towards the time frame in terms of healing, because it can vary from person to person. So what's your perspective on that?
Definitely. I don't give grief a time frame as well. I tell all my clients that we're all different. So somebody may be able to move on with their grief maybe within a couple months because that's how they're wired. But other people it may take them a couple years. They may have to do some more work, and that's when the therapy side of it. So it's not just grief. We'll probably have to deal with more of like depression or PTSD, like dig into more of the mental health side of it because it's not just grief. Yeah, I don't feel like there is a time frame. Like I said, there's days where I have moments where it's just like I really miss my mom. So, or someone who just passed away. So it's everybody has their different time frames, and I don't give people a time frame like, oh, you should be healed by March 20th of this day. Like, no, I don't give time frames at all. I feel like people should be able to grieve at their time and what's convenient for them.
Yeah, very true. As a matter of fact, before my mother passed away, I was counseling people who had suffered loss, and I had to go back to one of my clients and apologize because I was doing it from a theoretical standpoint. I
Hmm.
can make sense to it, but now that I experienced it, it's totally different. And so I agree that the time frame, it goes from person to person, and I'm happy to hear that you do the same thing.
Yeah, but I have learned also from working in the field. I worked with addictions, and
Mm.
of course they're getting sober from it, and then now they're just now processing the grief. So it may be something that happened 20 years ago. So it's
Mm.
something that I have to tell them like, no, it's okay. It may have happened 20 years ago, but 9 times out of 10, this is probably the reason why you were numbing your pain. So this is something we have to work on. So I found that really big with sitting them down, and there's no time frame. You're okay to grieve. I don't care how long it was. You're okay to grieve whenever.
So, when someone is grieving, Nige, at what stage would you advise someone it's time to see a counselor. We can try and self medicate, like you said, the ones who maybe take drugs or alcohol. But at what point should a person stop and say, okay, it's time to go and get professional help?
Well, honestly, from a grief standpoint, I believe that maybe people should start off with seeing a therapist. And then if they can work on lowering their symptoms, or, because their symptoms may be like, if you look at the DSM, it's going to say if you categorize yourself a 5 out of 10 of these symptoms, then you may have depression or you may have PTSD. So at that time, you need to work on the higher things. And then when it's time to work on your grief, it's like, I don't want to say a step down, but I feel like mental health is going to help you overall. So you have to work on your mental side of it before working on, because a grief could be an ongoing thing. Like I said, it's no time frame, but for your mental health, I think that's the top of the line. So if you may be suffering at a great point, then seek therapy right away. But if it's someone like, I could say for a child, since I was so young, I didn't know what depression or PTSD was. So of course, my aunt put me in a support group first, and it made me feel normal. It made me feel like, okay, I'm not the only kid dealing with it. So I was able to deal with my grief totally different. So a kid may benefit more from a support group first, but as adults who know how to manage our emotions and stuff, we may just like, oh no, I need higher help and I need to go see a therapist right away. So I think it's like a little balance, but I think dealing with your mental health is top tier. Do that first. And then grief, like I said, is an ongoing process. So you can always come to grief support groups and things of that nature forever if you want, if you need it.
And so, as Shanika had mentioned earlier, the title of this show is to be able to deal with the blues during the holidays. And so, what tips, would you give persons to kind of cope? Because we got Thanksgiving and family comes around. Maybe like for me, I'm missing my mother's cooking. Then you got Christmas and things of that nature. What kind of tips would you give persons to deal with it and say, you know what, how I'm going to cope with this loss, especially during this pandemic? How can they cope with it, do you think?
So, um, me and my aunt actually talked about this last night. It's actually funny we brought this conversation up, but we were talking about keeping traditions alive. So, after you lose like the matriarch of your family, which would have been my grandma, and if you lose that person, and sometimes traditions fall, and we family don't come together, and
Yeah.
so we're all grieving separately instead of coming as a family, which my grandma would have wanted us to all do, still come in as a family and still celebrate. So keep those traditions alive. Do what they would want you to do. They wouldn't want everybody to be separate and be mad at everybody's house. They would want the whole family. So I'm big on keeping traditions. If everybody is dealing, do something to remember them. If you
Mm,
all
yeah.
have to pick one of her favorite recipes, or pick something that's going to remind you of them. I'm really big on memorials. So if that's something that can help you if you need that. Also, maybe try something new. If
Mm,
your traditions are going to be too hard for you to cope with, or smelling a certain smell is going to bring back the memory of them, try something different. Try a new
okay.
tradition, make a new tradition. Yeah. I think those are really big during the holidays because we always try to, well, let's do this, or let's do, like, try something new.
Yeah.
That'll help build new things that you can do. And
Okay.
yeah.
Which kind of leads to the next question. So, in terms of your profession and your business and things of that nature, do you also deal with those who are on the front line, maybe police officers or fire persons who may be grieving and they still have to show up to work? A lot of times I find that, they're grieving as well, but sometimes they have to push forward. They're in the front line. So do you deal with that, and how would they have to, how could they cope during this
Yeah,
time?
I've never worked with anyone front line. I don't believe. Look, I don't think so. But I'm very big. I push therapy, I think, to any and everybody. That's my first thing I say to everybody. And I don't say that just because I'm a therapist.
Right.
I say because we all need it. Even therapists. I tell I
Yes.
tell people all the time, I'm a therapist and I go to therapy. I do not
Yeah.
mind disclosing that I go to therapy because I listen to people all day, and sometimes countertransference, may
Yeah.
hit you differently. So just like frontline workers and doctors who lose people, they also need to seek that. And I know a lot of jobs are now hiring therapists are giving free sessions to, workers who are on the front line and things like that. So definitely utilize those resources that your jobs are giving you for free
Hmm.
therapy sessions and things like that. They're not even counting them towards your insurance now. They're giving free sessions, so utilize them. And it's really big. I would love to get into places like that to kind of shed the light, because let's be honest, therapy is frowned upon. People don't want to talk to people. I don't
Yeah.
want them in my business, or they don't know what I go through, or this is my job.
Right. Right.
This is my job. I'm supposed to, suck it up, but it bothers you.
Yeah.
So definitely just shining the light to use those resources, because therapy is what we all need.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you said it because it's something I'm beginning to look into is like the stigma attached to therapy and mental health. Have you had to deal with that in your line of work?
Yes, every day I do adolescents intensive outpatient, and my kids come and they're like, nothing's wrong with me. I never had any type of trauma, but DCS removed them from their moms, and they don't think that's a trauma, but they don't want to talk to me. So sometimes I take my therapy hat off and I have to just give them Najee. So sometimes, and I tell my boss all the time, okay, they're not getting Najee today. They're not getting therapy Najee. They're going to get Najee, because I have to relate to them in a different way, because the stigma is different, especially in the Black community. It's
Yeah,
something that we just were never taught, and we don't want to talk to people. It's something that we're just like, we'll deal with it. It's everyday life, traumas and things like, and grief. It's normal at this point. So I preach to everyone the stigma of mental health and the
mhm,
stigma of therapy. That was another reason why I decided to be a therapist, because I knew that I could benefit from coming back to my small community here in Pittsburgh and helping spread the light on mental health. And it's okay to seek therapy.
And so a parent brings in a child just under teenage years, and you have to tell them that it's okay to be sad. How do you walk that child through the first stages?
So it depends. If they're maybe in that age, that stage of still liking to color and things like, I created a workbook to go with my book that I wrote. So it's a few different pages, maybe just talking about anger and how to express your anger. So doing something that's going to capture the child's attention. It doesn't have to be directly. I personally wouldn't jump right into the it's okay to be sad. I would try to get them to feel comfortable and to be able to express themselves, because that's the first thing. Because as a kid, they probably don't know how to fully express their sadness. So getting them to understand their sadness and where it's coming from, and then being able to process it. So there's so many games. We've played Sad Uno. So maybe every time you
mhm,
get a red card, you have to say something that made you sad. And that makes them realize, like, okay, maybe I was sad at this time. So they're understanding their sadness. It's letting them identify their sadness and what sadness means to them. Because they may say, well, my favorite dog broke. And then another one may say, well, my dog got ran over by a car. So the person who the dog got ran over may understand death a little bit more than the person who, my dog's head broke off. They don't know, so you have to meet them where they're at, what level they are at, and where they're ready to talk about their sadness. So then you kind of build up to that. So there's tons of activities for kids to process their emotions. And I wouldn't even say grief yet. I would just say their emotions, because first,
mhm.
that's what they need to do. They need to be able to identify, okay, at this moment, I'm sad. And then this sadness was brought on because of my grief. So first, they have to be able to identify their emotions.
So, and if identifying the emotions, even in men, can be kind of ticklish because a lot of people say that men are not emotional, but I always try to explain. Actually, we're very emotional.
Mhm.
If someone tries to hit my wife, I get jealous. That's an emotion. Or if a football game someone scores, I get excited. So, have you had to deal with men and trying to get them to identify their emotions?
Yes, I actually just had a conversation last night with someone close to me, and I was explaining that is, I know that as Black men, that they don't feel like they have an outlet. They feel like they should be strong all the time. And actually my kid too, when I was at IOP, because they just put on this strong face, like, I'm a boy, I'm not supposed to cry, I'm not supposed to feel these emotions. And I have to tell them all the time that it's okay to show these emotions as a man because you'll feel better. And once you realize that it's okay to show these emotions, you'll be able to work on some stuff that you never thought that you'll work on, because trauma is very much so real, and trauma doesn't just go away. Trauma
Yeah.
sticks, and that age that you experience that trauma is probably the age that you're probably stuck at. So that's what I
Right.
try to teach my kids
Okay.
now at 15, to let's work on your trauma from 2 years ago instead of you waiting till you're 25 and you're wondering why you can't stay in a committed relationship. There's things like that. So I actually have, I think, all boys and like two girls in my groups. So it happens all the time that I'm like pulling teeth trying to get them to talk, to just listen sometimes. But they're boys and they're like, "Well, I'm not going through anything." But there's day that I get them and they're just me and them, and I'm like, "Okay, it's time to have the conversation." And they're like, "Okay." And I have some that show emotion and they'll cry. No, you're not going to tell the other group. Nope, I'm not. So they just need
Good.
that safe person.
Wow, that's good because our men are taught and trained to be macho and not to show emotions. But if they have had a trauma somewhere in their life, you said it very well. They could very well be stuck at
Hmm.
7 years old and now they're 37 and can't figure out why
Hmm.
things aren't working or why they're not able to stay in a committed relationship. And it's because they have to go back to that place of 7 years old. That was powerful.
And so, in terms of grief, even as men, have you seen them impacting, or the boys impacting their families in terms of now they're expressing themselves? They see a turnaround.
Not so much. They're not with me super long. I think they come for like 20 sessions. And of course, we do them like 3 days a week. So some of them don't take it serious and they're just doing it
Mm.
just to get out. But I tell them all the time, it's okay to, call back to the office and ask to speak to one of us if you need to get back into services, because there's going to be a time that you're like, oh, Najee was right. I don't want to
Mm.
be the person to say, like, you're going to call me and you're going to tell me that I was right. But they are still 15 and 16 years old. So they're not looking at it as trauma. I actually did the ACEs, the childhood trauma, the ACEs with them. And all the ones who said they didn't have trauma actually scored every single one of those. But there's no way in a group to just identify, well, you scored this, so we have to be a little more, you know. So if they do come and they are an outpatient with me, I'm able to explain their results a little bit more and maybe dig in a little deeper. But in a group setting, it's a little different and they get away with it. They know that there's only so much that we can say in a group and do. So I do have one that actually comes for aftercare and he doesn't have to. He still comes every week. And it's pretty great to see that he still comes. And everybody's like, why do you still come? We hate being here. And he's like, no, they really help me. So he's identified it, but he is a little older. I think he 16 or 17. So he's understanding it. Like, no, he really needs to still come and visit
Mm.
us. So, and they all have the option to still come a year after they finish our program.
And you know what? Even though they may not be taking it seriously now, you're still planting seeds.
Hmm.
So they have the information, it's in their brain. So one day they will come back to the fact that even if they have to go to Nije or someone else, that hey, I may need to go and talk to someone about
Yep.
this issue. So you're still planting seeds and your work is not for naught.
Yeah, I try to. They have a curriculum and it's so boring, and the kids they'd be really bored. So I try to do fun things with them to get them to remember, like, oh, okay, this is something that we did and it was fun, and they remember it when they leave. It's not me just reading to them or preaching to them or them just talking. I try to do fun things to get them to remember, because they're kids and they have to sit with me for 3 hours 3 days out of the week.
So I guess that fun part will lead into your activity book and your book. Go ahead and tell us about the new release that you had this year.
Yes, I wrote a book called The Day I Lost My Purple Flower. It is actually my story, the day I lost my mom. It's crazy how it came about. Literally talked to my aunt and she said, I think you should write a children's book, because I was telling her that I wanted to start my grief support program. And she was like, well, I think you should write a book. And I'm like, a book. And she's like, yeah, a children's book. And literally within 2 days, I wrote the book and got the illustration set up. So it didn't take me long to get everything situated. It was just literally a calling, obviously, because it happened, and I've been getting really great reviews from people who use it with their kids for therapy. And the workbook actually aligns with it. So on different pages of the book, I go through the 5 stages of grief. So I'm able to use the pictures, and this is what it may look like when you're angry. I think it may be 2 or 3 pages per stages of grief. So it's about 15 pages. It's not too big. And I really got some really great reviews from coworkers. My boss actually bought a couple copies and they use it throughout the office. So it's pretty great. So I just published both of those in June, and I've been getting really great feedback from it. And I'm actually thinking about number two. So we're processing it and getting it all together. But yes, those are my two babies, my first published books.
All right, and where can we find your book?
Amazon. So if you literally just type the day I lost my purple flower, both of the books will pop up. The interactive workbook will say the day I lost my purple flower interactive workbook. And they actually pop up being sold together. So they're right there. They are $11.98, I believe. They are on Prime. They do come in 2 to 3 days. And it's a great resource if you're trying to teach your kids, or I've had adults say it helped them process.
Wonderful. So the day I lost my purple flower, you can find it on Amazon.com by searching the title, The Day I Lost My Purple Flower, or by author Nije Johnson.
Yes.
Awesome. And so, how could a person get in contact with you to know about your program if they're interested in, as a resource for them?
Yes, my Instagram is Good Grief Support, and also Facebook is Good Grief Support Services. So my business is called Good Grief. As soon as I get enough people, I will be doing weekly grief support, and those will be completely free for anyone. And even if people want to do one-on-ones, but as form as grief support, I'm willing to offer them for free. um just trying to have that outlet, because I know we have all experienced some type of grief and loss these past couple years now at this point. So just giving that free resource to anyone that needs it. And my contact information is on my website, on my Facebook and my Instagram. So I have a direct line if anyone needs to call and message me and get any type of questions. I'm always here and open to it.
And do you accept virtual clients as well?
Yes. Most of them will be virtual. So anybody, any state, anywhere, that's where the grief coaching comes in, where I can do different states and all that good stuff. So yeah, most definitely.
Well, good. So, as we begin to close, do you have any final words for our audience, and specifically, regarding maybe the holidays and things of that nature?
Yes, during this time, if you need to reach out to anyone, being myself, or reach out to a therapist or that resource that I was talking about for jobs, please do so. Don't hesitate. If you think no one cares, you do have professional people that do really care about you guys, and get the free service if you need it. And we'll help you get through this tough time during the holidays.
Nigel, you have been awesome on tonight. I truly sense your passion for this area, grief management, especially when it comes to the children and the young men. And I am appreciative of the work that you do to help change our community and help us to address these areas, especially when it comes to the children, because not often do we remember that when there is a loss, the children are impacted. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing with us tonight. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for letting us know it's okay to be sad, and we can talk about these areas, and we can even use other alternative therapies to get through this time and identify the source of the problem and move forward.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You are so welcome.
You're welcome. And thank you, audience, for joining us today. We pray that you learned something that'll help you be better, do better, and live better. And we would love to hear from you. Now, let us know how you may, implement some of those tips that she shared with us, or even if you got the resource and how it has blessed you. Please contact us. And remember to like and to share and to review this particular episode. And once again, thank you for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you again next week right here on the Living Well Show. God bless and have a great night.
Good night.